It's now in order to consider Amendment number 12, printed in House Report 115-1. For what purposes the gentleman from Iowa seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I the desk made in order under the rule.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 12, printed in House Report number 115-1, offered by Mr. King of Iowa.
Pursuant to House Resolution 22, the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to say that I've been a long and a strong supporter of the REINS Act, and I want to compliment Congressman Jeff Davis of Kentucky for introducing and crafting that legislation. While he was doing that, I was drafting a bill that I named the Sunset Act. And I looked at it from the broad scope of this, that we have a lot of regulations that exist and have existed for decades. And some of them are burdensome and some of them are not. But the effect of the REINS Act, which I certainly will support on a final passage, hopefully with the King Amendment adopted in it, but the REINS Act de facto simply grandfathers in existing regulations. And so it's only prospective. It addresses the major regulations going forward, but not those that we are stuck with, such as the Waters of the United States, the Clean Power Plan, the overtime rule, the fiduciary rule, the net neutrality rule, the Dodd-Frank rules, and heaven forbid the Obamacare rules if we should fail to repeal Obamacare. And so what the King Amendment does is it directs and allows the agencies in the executive branch of government to send a minimum of 10% of their regulations to the Congress each year for the duration of a decade, encompassing a full 100% of all of the regulations in place at the time of passage and enactment of the underlying legislation. That gives Congress then authority and a vote over all of this. It gives us an ability to amend that legislation. We can pass them all en banc, or we can amend them accordingly, but we can do what our founding fathers envisioned we should do, and that is the essence of this. By the way, President-elect Trump has made some strong pledges on dramatically reducing regulation in the United States. He doesn't have the tools without the King Amendment. And with that, I will reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Iowa is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I would inquire as to how much time may be remaining for each side.
The gentleman has 3.5 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Georgia has a half minute remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to yield a minute to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Marino.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Congressman King. First of all, I fully support Congressman King's amendment. It improves the viability of the REINS Act. It makes sure that the responsibility of legislation is in the hands of we legislators. But let me just ask this simple question. My good friend on the other side says that we should let the agencies and departments regulate and make rules. Well, let me ask you this. How's it been going the last 20 years in this country? We're $20 trillion in debt. 20 million people out of work or underemployed. Are we going to continue to let bureaucrats make these decisions that crush jobs? No, I don't think so. It's our responsibility in the House. It's our responsibility in the Senate. We can hear from individuals, as I've repeatedly said here, in those agencies, but we need to make the final decision, because just look at the track record over the last 20 or 30 years of unelected bureaucrats making these rules, laws, and regulations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself the balance of my time.
Gentleman recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, first, I would say that, yes, we can blame a lot of debt and deficit on a burden of regulations. We can blame it because there's a huge cost to our executive branch of government. That cost, much of it, the unnecessary component, all those goes against our debt and deficit. And we saw as Barack Obama came in as president, we had a $10 trillion debt, which he was very critical of throughout his campaign in 2007 and 8. Now, as he leaves office here, thankfully, in a couple of weeks, it's a $20 trillion debt, and we can start to ratchet this thing back down. Looking at the Obama administration and their reports on the cost of regulation, they come up with this number reported to the Heritage Foundation, that the annual cost of regulations to the United States, according to the Obama administration, is $108 billion, Mr. Chairman. And so that is what we're looking at here for cost. But I want to get at the real this. Article 1 of the Constitution says Congress shall make all law. And yet we have the courts making laws over on across the street, and we have regulations coming at us at a rate of, and I expressed to the gentleman from Georgia, 10 to 1. For every law we passed in the last Congress, the 114th Congress, there were at least 10 regulations that were poured over our head, and we're sitting in a place where we don't have the tools to undo them. Now we have a president that's ready, and he wants to undo these regulations. If we make him march through the Administrative Procedures Act, it's heavy, it's burdensome, and it's time-consuming. But this King Amendment gives the tools for the next President of the United States to work with Congress to trim this regulatory burden down, and the most important part is it makes all of us in the House and the Senate, accountable then for all of the regulations. Regulations were allowed. The APA was passed to dish off this legislative responsibility to the executive branch. Congress took a pass. They ducked their responsibility of being accountable for all legislation and found a way to be producing less than 10% of the legislation that exists even in a given year. So the King Amendment says over a period of a decade, 10% a year at a minimum, Congress will have to review all the regulations. And the people from across America, we the people, will weigh in on that regulation. And then an even better part of this is not only will we be accountable here in Congress, and we should be, but when the bureaucrats, the nameless, faceless bureaucrats, are across the desk from our constituents and they refuse to listen to our constituents, there's going to be a little bug in the back of their ear that's going to be saying to them, you know what, this constituent that may be losing their business over this regulation, the next stop they make is going to be with their congressman, and these regulations that we promulgated are going to be subject then to being repealed by the United States Congress, as they should be. Support the King Amendment. It puts the authority back into the hands of Article 1, we the people.
Gentleman has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Iowa. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Iowa will be postponed.